Every night, when the velvet curtains dropped and the last applause faded into echoes, the grand opera house emptied out. The chandeliers dimmed, the velvet seats cooled. The crowd's excitement was gone, and only silence reigned in the vast hall. But in that silence, something extraordinary happened. Jadian Moore was there, not as an audience member, not as a star, not even as a member of the orchestra or chorus. She was the janitor, a black woman wearing faded work clothes, rubber gloves, and holding a mop, invisible to most. Background noise in the glittering world of opera, forgotten by those who filled these seats just hours earlier. She moved quietly between rows of seats, pushing her bucket and wringing out her rag, cleaning up crumbs, spilled drinks, and discarded programs. She was supposed to stay invisible. But tonight, Jadian did something no one expected. She started to sing. A pure, haunting melody rose from deep within her, a voice that was anything but ordinary. It wasn't trained for the spotlight, nor polished by expensive lessons. It was raw, honest, and filled with a kind of aching beauty that clung to every note. Her voice floated through the empty hall like a prayer, filling every corner with a warmth that no audience could ever hear. Ave Maria. Her song wasn't a rehearsal. It was a message from a woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. A woman who carried a secret flame that no one dared to see. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the stage. The sound of voices grew near, whispers mixed with laughter. It was the assistant director, known for her sharp tongue and sharper judgments. "What do you think you're doing?" The assistant sneered, stepping into the hall. Her voice dripped with disdain. "You think this is America's Got Talent? This is an opera house, not a talent show, girl." Two other performers appeared, smirking as they crossed their arms. "Yeah, what's next? And you gonna rap in Italian?" One laughed cruelly. The joke stung like cold rain, but Jadian kept singing, letting her voice drown out the bitterness. What they didn't know was that behind the curtain, someone was watching, someone who could not ignore the power in her voice. From the shadows of the balcony emerged a man in a long black coat, Reginaldo Bellini, the famed opera director from Milan. He had arrived incognito, seeking a new talent to star in the upcoming production of La Traviata. He was a man used to grandeur and perfection, but nothing prepared him for the sound that cut through the silence now. "Chi ha cantato questo?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. "Who is singing this?" The assistant director scoffed. "Just the janitor. You want her to dance too?" Reginaldo's eyes locked on Jadian. There was something more than just a voice. There was soul, fire, and undeniable talent. He stepped forward and commanded in a firm voice, "Sing it again." Jadian hesitated, heart pounding, but then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and sang, not for the empty seats, not for the mocking crowd, but for him, for herself, and for all the unheard dreams she carried inside. The hall went silent after she finished, the kind of silence that fills a room with awe and disbelief. Reginaldo slowly removed his gloves. His eyes glistened with emotion. "Cancel tomorrow's auditions," he said, turning to the assistant director. "We've already found our star." Jadian stood there, mop in hand, gloves still wet, in the middle of the grand stage. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. For 15 years, Jadian had walked these floors, cleaning up after a world that never noticed her. Every scuffed floor, every spilled drink, every discarded napkin, she had been there. the quiet presence behind the scenes. People spoke around her, not to her. She was just the janitor, never Jadian, never Miss Moore, just a shadow. But Jadian held a secret in her heart, a secret she nurtured every night when the crowds left and the stage lights dimmed. She sang, not for fame or fortune, but because it was the one thing that made her feel alive. She dreamed of a day when her voice wouldn't just echo through empty halls, but fill the seats with awe and applause. That night, that dream began to take shape. What no one knew was that Jadian's journey wasn't just about a beautiful voice. It was about breaking barriers, shattering expectations, and reclaiming a place in a world that had tried to keep her silent. And it all started when her voice froze the opera director in his tracks. The morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of the opera house, casting long shadows across the empty stage. Backstage, the smell of old wood mingled with the faint scent of roses left over from last night's performance. But the silence was different today. Something new was stirring beneath the surface, a restless energy, a secret waiting to be revealed. Jaden Moore stood just off stage, still in her worn rubber gloves, the mop bucket forgotten for the moment. She could barely believe what had happened. Last night, the director from Milan had heard her sing, really heard her. Not just the voice, but the pain, the hope, the strength behind it. The news spread quietly but swiftly. The assistant director, who had mocked her only hours before, now avoided her gaze. The same performers who had laughed were strangely silent during rehearsals. Behind the scenes, whispers buzzed like electricity through the backstage corridors. "Did you hear? Bellini wants her to sing." No way. The janitor? Here? But her voice, it's unreal. In the quiet moments before the day's rehearsal, Reginaldo Bellini's presence filled the room. He wasn't just an ordinary visitor. He was a man with a reputation that preceded him like thunder. His name alone could make or break careers, open doors to the grandest stages or slam them shut forever. Jadian had watched him from a distance, standing tall in his black coat, eyes sharp as a hawk's, scrutinizing every corner of the theater. But when his gaze met hers, something shifted. A spark of recognition, a silent promise. "Miss Moore," he said finally, his Italian accent smooth but commanding. "I want you to meet with the vocal coach. We will prepare you for the role of Violetta." Her heart hammered wildly, but she nodded, barely trusting her voice. "Yes, signore." The months that followed were a whirlwind unlike anything Jadian had ever imagined. The theater that once seemed a distant dream became her world. The mop bucket was replaced by sheet music, the cleaning closet by rehearsal rooms, the whispers by applause. But it wasn't easy. Every day was a battle, not just with the rigorous training, the exhausting schedules, or the complicated music. It was a fight against doubt, both from others and within herself. Some cast members still looked at her with thinly veiled suspicion. How could the janitor suddenly be a prima donna? Some whispered that she was a novelty, a stunt, an accident of fate. Others openly doubted her ability to handle the pressure. One evening, during a particularly grueling rehearsal, a group of performers gathered near the stage door. One of them, a tenor who once jeered at her singing, spoke loud enough to be heard. "You don't belong here, Jadian. This isn't a place for someone like you." Another chimed in, smirking. "Maybe you should stick to mopping floors. Leave the singing to us." Jadian's hands trembled for a moment. The old familiar sting of invisibility tried to creep back in, but she lifted her chin, steadied her breath, and spoke quietly but firmly. "This is where I belong, and I will prove it." Her words echoed in the corridor, not just a defiance but a declaration. Those who had doubted her fell silent, taken aback by the quiet strength she carried like armor. Behind the scenes, Reginaldo Bellini watched all of this unfold. He saw not just the talent, but the resilience. The opera world was full of stars born into privilege and opportunity. But here was someone who had fought tooth and nail for every note, every measure. He pulled her aside one afternoon, after a rehearsal that had pushed her to the edge of exhaustion. "Jadian," he said, eyes intense, "your voice is not just beautiful, it is a weapon. Use it to shatter the walls that have kept you hidden. Do not let them tell you who you are or where you belong." His words burned into her soul. She realized then that the real performance wasn't just on the stage, but in breaking through the invisible barriers of prejudice and expectation. As the premiere approached, the theater buzzed with excitement and tension. Reporters sniffed out the story of the janitor-turned-opera star. Social media lit up with headlines and whispers, some filled with awe, others with skepticism. Jaden's world was changing overnight. Invitations to interviews, offers of endorsements, and the spotlight she had dreamed of for so long were finally within reach. But with the light came shadows. One evening, as she prepared for a final rehearsal, the assistant director confronted her alone in a quiet hallway. "You're lucky Bellini took a shine to you," she said, voice low and venomous. "But don't think this means you're one of us. You'll never really be part of this world." Jadian looked her in the eyes, calm but resolute. "I'm not here to be one of you. I'm here to be me, and my voice will do the talking." The assistant scoffed, but there was no answer to give. Jaden had learned that the greatest battles were won not with anger, but with grace. On opening night, the Grand Theater was packed. The seats shimmered under the glittering chandeliers. The air was thick with anticipation. The city's elite, critics, and loyal patrons waited to witness the performance that was already making history. Backstage, Jadian felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was different now. No longer fear, but fierce determination. When the curtains rose and the orchestra swelled, Jadian stepped into the light. Her voice soared. Every note told a story of struggle, pain, hope, and triumph. The audience was spellbound. The barriers of race, class, and history melted away in the face of her talent. And when the final note hung in the air, silence gave way to thunderous applause. Jadian Moore was no longer invisible. She was a star. A month had passed since Jadian Moore's stunning debut as Violetta in La Traviata. The opera house was buzzing with excitement, and the name Jadian Moore was on everyone's lips. From the highest society circles to the eager young singers dreaming of their own chance. But for Jadian, the real transformation was only just beginning. The grand posters that now adorned the city's streets showed her radiant face framed by elegant costumes and dramatic lighting. Critics who had once scoffed were now praising her depth and emotion. The theater's social media was flooded with videos of her breathtaking performances. Invitations to galas and charity events arrived daily. And yet, despite all this, Jadian never forgot where she came from. One chilly afternoon, as the golden autumn leaves swirled outside, she found herself walking the familiar halls of the opera house, not as a star, but with the quiet humility that had carried her through years of struggle. She passed the dressing rooms, now filled with whispers of admiration rather than scorn. She smiled at the stagehands and makeup artists who had supported her journey. But then she paused near the janitor's closet. Inside, the assistant director from the early days stood scrubbing the floor. Her eyes widened when she saw Jadian approaching, now dressed in a flowing gown instead of work gloves. "Oh, Miss Moore," she said, her voice tight. "Are you here to clean?" Jadian met her gaze steadily. No, I came to say thank you. The assistant blinked in confusion. I want to thank you, Jadine continued, for the lessons, for the challenges, because none of it could have made me stronger. The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly, the harshness softening. That day marked a subtle but profound shift. Jadine understood now that her journey wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about breaking down walls for everyone who came after her. She remembered the artists who had mocked her, the staff who had ignored her, the people who had dismissed her voice. But instead of bitterness, she felt compassion. In the weeks that followed, the very dynamics of the opera house began to change. The assistant director, once quick to sneer, found herself assigned to a different post. The artists who had laughed were now rehearsing alongside Jadian, some even asking for her advice. The janitor who had once shared the halls with Jadian now looked at her with pride, knowing that the woman who had mopped the floors was now the soul of the stage. One evening, as the final act of the opera ended to a standing ovation, Jadian stepped off stage and found herself face to face with Reginaldo Bellini. He handed her a small, delicate box. "Open it," he said quietly. Inside was a pair of white opera gloves, soft and pristine. "You are no longer the janitor," Bellini said, his eyes gleaming. "Tonight, you wear the gloves of the stage." Tears pricked at Jadian's eyes, not of sadness, but of liberation. For years, those gloves had seemed a distant symbol, reserved for the privileged, the elite. Now, they were hers. She slipped them on, feeling the smooth fabric against her skin, a tangible reminder that her voice and her courage had rewritten her story. The applause that followed was not just for her singing, but for the story she embodied, of resilience, dignity, and the power to change one's destiny. From that night on, Jadian Moore was no longer just a name on a poster. She was a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The opera house had changed, and so had she.